Hello, and welcome to the Godot Community for Visual Art High School 3D. I hope you were able to take some time to watch my introduction video so you could learn a little bit about me. I also hope that you were able to post some information about yourself so that we can all start to get to know one another. If not, it's not too late. I look forward to learning about you and all the great work that you're doing for your students. For this session, we're going to tackle 3 topics covering classroom setup, a favorite lesson or activity, and tried and true strategies that work. We're going to start by talking about classroom setup. I think for most of us, our go-to classroom setups have kind of been upended by having to accommodate a new learning environment. I think even in a typical school year, we have our own unique set of circumstances that govern how we approach the setup of our classrooms. I've had semesters where I teach intro and then I teach sculpture and then I go back to an intro class and then I end the day with ceramics, and it can be super chaotic. So in my experience, I found that it's really important that I have my class set up in a way that can maximize the amount of time that I have for instruction and that students have to work with the materials. As a 3D teacher, you all know that students can't take work home, or they can't take it home in a very practical way a lot of times. You're hopefully not sending kids home with jigsaws, and you're not going to send an expensive jar of glaze with them. So I've found that I tend to compartmentalize my room. I have common areas, of course, but I also have a glaze section. I have a tabletop tools section. I have a section of 2D materials for just 3D purposes. And because many of you probably also teach the visual art comp too, then you've got all that stuff as well. So, if I'm able, I might keep a separate set of the same tools for different disciplines. Now, that's not always possible. But for example, I'll have paintbrushes for painting and I'll have paintbrushes for slip. Of course, the paintbrushes for slip tend to be paintbrushes that used to be used for painting, but maybe aren't so great anymore. I make sure early on that students know where tools for their particular class are located. This often means that students need to understand what the tools and materials are used for. I think that tool and material demos are best done from project to project, again, because of practicality. But also, if you show everything in the beginning, then there's no surprise, but also there's not always a lot of retention. But I do take students on a classroom field trip where we learn the basic layout of the room and where things are located. I've had luck doing scavenger hunts where I've paired or grouped students and asked them to find specific tools or identify areas in the room where certain processes happen. I think that this can provide an understanding of what is designated for what and also create the beginnings of studio stewardship, which I think is very important. It's my experience that students really take pride in having an understanding of what tool is used for what purpose, especially when they are overlapped with other students. So I've had a student that maybe has had a free period or a different lunch, and he might come into my class and is using a tool that other students don't have seen but maybe don't know what it's used for, like the extruder or the slab roller. And, then that student has been able to show them, oh, this is what it's used for. And we all know that students teaching other students is the best. And of course, the students take pride in being able to share their knowledge. I think a big challenge right now is how we set up a classroom for social distancing or have a student set up a classroom for themselves if they're virtual learners. The basics for virtual learners is, I think, pretty universal. It's finding an environment where they can work with the least amount of distractions and with a good amount of workspace. Of course, this is more difficult for some than others, so I think we just need to be aware of that and keep it in mind. Some students are probably babysitting while they're also trying to make work for your class. So I think being aware is really important. I think also students in general who are remote feel that because they don't have access to the environment, to the classroom, that they can't be successful. So another challenge that we face is to show students that they can be successful with what they have in their surroundings. Materials are a somewhat difficult area, I think, especially for ceramics. There's some really good sculpture and sculptural process that can be done using found objects, cardboard. There can be environmental or earthworks, but clay is a little bit more difficult. There are options such as salt dough and homemade air dry clay. I've included the recipe for both, and I will put those in our discussion post in the community. And these are not 100% substitutions. Students may not be able to apply the same techniques and processes as they would traditional clay. But I think it's really important that kids are that they're getting their hands on materials, that, we can only have them write about do so much artist research or technique research. It's really important that the kids are working with materials, and salt dough or homemade air dry clay, which is really, they're both inexpensive options for exploring texture and simple form. Another area of difficulty could be managing tools. I always stress to my students that working with clay doesn't require using any fancy tools. I myself have all of the bells and whistles, and then I usually end up using a sharpened pencil, a paintbrush, and a rib tool. So, it's really important that they know that they don't have to have those fancy tools. And even if you're teaching face-to-face, there's still an issue of sharing tools. There's issues with sanitizing surfaces and the time it takes to sanitize a surface. So this year, I've had both my virtual and my face-to-face students collect items from their surroundings that are great substitutions for clay tools. So to reinforce how effective these tools are, all of the demos that I've done for them, I've done using the tool alternatives that I'm asking them to use. So instead of scoring my clay with my serrated rib tool, I'm scoring with a comb. Instead of smoothing my clay with a silicone rib, I'm using an old discarded or expired gift card. I'm rolling my slabs with a spray paint can instead of a rolling pin, and I'm paddling with an old bamboo spatula. Seeing me model using these tools and having success gives them sort of that understanding that it can be done and they are not at a complete disadvantage. It's also a really good talking point for how early ceramics were formed and decorated. If you think about what was accessible to early potters and early cultures and civilizations, they didn't have fancy stuff. They had what was in their surroundings. It's also a great talking point for the role of ceramics tradition versus technology. So, do we need all of these advancement? And where is the role of the traditional handmade object? From this point, I want to transition into our next topic, which is favorite lesson or activity. I thought about this and I guess I felt like I should be talking about a major summative project, but then I just kept going back to those assignments that started by students thinking about form and how the principles are demonstrated through form. And I also wanted to discuss an art criticism project that I've had success with. I think art criticism is a difficult area to make interesting. And the lesson that I want to share is a really good guided analysis of ceramics that compares tradition with contemporary work. I feel like the most successful art history courses I ever took were taught by instructors who knew little details, little tidbits of information that maybe weren't in the book. And, and getting to know a little bit about the artist and not just the artwork, I think is important and really opens up a lot of, for a lot of discussion about art. So we're going to start with a mini lab that I have been doing for years that I'm fairly certain that I stole from Jess Booth, which is design cubes. So this is a really great exercise because students, I think a lot of times are reluctant about 3D. I think they think sculpture is cool, but they're not really 100% sure about the materials and the tools. And that makes sense because they have the least experience with 3D tools and materials. And so this activity allows them to use what they're familiar with. So scissors, markers, glue, pencil, and create form. So most classrooms are going to have these 2D supplies, and there's a lot of choice within creating the designs. So typically I'll begin with showing students a elements and principles of design PowerPoint. They should at this point already have some understanding of the elements and principles, but this goes just a little bit more in depth on how the principles, elements and principles are applied a little bit differently. There's a lot of overlap, of course, but a little bit differently to three-dimensional form than to 2D form. For example, you know, when we're talking about value on a two-dimensional artwork, you're talking about the darkness or the lightness that has been applied to a surface. When you're talking about value with form, you could be talking about that, but you could also be talking about how light and shadow is affecting what we're looking at. So we have that conversation first, and the link to this PowerPoint will also be in our Godot community post. The thing I do is I provide students with a simple template. I've found it online. You could do different forms if you want. I choose a cube, but there are pyramids, they're more rectangular. And basically on each side of that cube, they create a mini composition. So, you know, whereas I want them to be comfortable using those supplies that they are familiar with, we also do I also do some demonstrating on how to create texture and negative space by cutting away paper, folding paper, layering paper. So it's a good crossover. Students are comfortable with 2D media, and this is giving them a little insight into creating 3D form. So, you know, and then making a form out of a piece of paper is literally translating 2D to 3D art. And they usually have great fun with it, you know, and it gives them, it's a good opening activity at the beginning of a semester or a Sculpture 1 class. When the students have completed their cubes, it can lead to further investigation of 3D form. Students can be grouped and assemble their cubes to demonstrate a principle. If there are enough students to create 3 or 4 collaborations, you can use this as an opportunity to have them look at each other's work and maybe determine which principle is being demonstrated. Another thing is that it could be an introduction to installation. So you could have all of your students collaborate in creating a single piece. This can, you know, in the classroom or somewhere out in the school. And I think that installation is one of those things that, again, it's like if you can get them comfortable with sculpture, that's the first step. And then let's start talking about installation and earthworks and site specific. So, you know, all these things can be a little bit intimidating for them, but to have it right out of the gate saying we're going to take this work and we're going to put it all together and we're going to take it out into our community and put it on display can be a really great thing to do early on to encourage students to be more experimental with how 3D work engages space. I've even had students use this concept as a jumping off point for larger sculptural pieces that they have included in their AP portfolios. So you can see an example of that on this slide as well. The second activity that I would like to discuss is the art analysis that I have had pretty good luck with. I actually started this, I didn't start it. I had a student teacher, Alan Merlot, who introduced me to this activity, and the students really responded to it, and I've been doing it since. And again, I think, you know, art criticism can be a little dry. kids in art class think that they should only be making every day a lot of times. And, they don't particularly like to discuss or even less so write about work. So with this lesson, students are presented first with an artist who's really relatable. They really, he has a very charismatic personality. They're able to call on knowledge from other disciplines. And since the work is in the collection at the High, they have the opportunity to possibly see it firsthand. If you are not familiar with Roberto Lugo, please look him up. He is a ceramic artist from Philadelphia. His parents emigrated from Puerto Rico, and he really came from humble beginnings. And he identifies not only as a potter, but a spoken word poet, an educator, and a social activist. He has several taglines, and one of them is "Pottery saved my life." His potter's wheel has on the side of it, it says, "This machine kills hate." So just a really positive message, and really great for talking about how art can be used as a vehicle for social commentary. His work references traditional forms and decorative patterns, but he infuses them with images of figures anywhere from Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass to Notorious B.I.G. There are graffiti influences. He actually started very young as a graffiti artist, so you see that influence in his work. The work is colorful, it's visually interesting, and it has that pop culture appeal that the kids really respond to. So in about, I think, 2016 or so, the High Museum commissioned Roberto Lugo to create a piece called Trails and Trials, A Century's Journey to a Dream. And the work acknowledges figures and events that shaped Atlanta and Georgia history over the past 100 years. A lot of references to civil rights. Some of the imagery is not celebratory. It takes a hard look at the sacrifices of slaves and the injustices of racism. It references the Trail of Tears, so the Native American plight as well. And the work can be directly compared to the Century Vase by the artist Carl Mueller. And the Century Vase was designed for the Centennial Exhibition. So when, the 100-year celebration, there was this huge exhibition. And of course, it was to celebrate all of the wonderful things that had happened over the first 100 years. And so it is, again, it's very celebratory. There's nothing negative about it. It shows the relationship between the Westerners and native people as being a very mutually beneficial relationship. It's about invention, electricity and westward expansion, and the bounty that this country offers in land and buffalo. And so it's just all about just all good and wonder. And so when you juxtapose it with this work by Roberto Lugo, it just creates for a really great and rich conversation. Both works are independently rich in information, but when you put them together, it's a really great conversation about, the role of ceramics as historical record keeper and the role of using traditional forms, but in a contemporary way. So sort of appropriating these old, highly decorative motifs and then taking them and making them into something that is more socially conscious. And again, the kids really respond to that. And I've included or will include in the discussion the document that covers the Roberto Lugo piece. And you can also go visit it at the High Museum. If you would like more Roberto Lugo, there is another piece that is in the High's collection called the Hip Hop Bowl. And this one is more of an homage to a piece by Victor Schreckengast, which was the Jazz Bowl or New Yorker Jazz Bowl, which celebrated jazz in I believe, the 30s, the 20s and 30s. And so Roberto Lugo, of course, put his contemporary spin on it. And so his is the Hip Hop Bowl. So again, taking this traditional work and sort of re-envisioning it. So again, a great piece at the High Museum that potentially you and your students could enjoy. This topic is tried and true strategies. When I was thinking about what I feel is most effective in my classroom, I kept going back to the one-on-one conversations that I have with my students. And it's time consuming, but I think the payoff is totally worth it. So a few years ago, I started, for every project, I started having about 3 one-on-one conversations with students over the course of the project. Some of these are more structured, where I might have students fill out some kind of questionnaire. Other times, it might be spur of the moment. We usually begin with discussing sketches and planning. So each student shares their plan with me, and we discuss options. We talk about construction technique, especially if it's more advanced and they have that choice of construction. Are they using what is most practical? Why are they making these choices? We ask a lot of whys. It's a great formative assessment of their understanding of the project and the project objectives. A week or so, depending on the length of the assignment, I would say a little bit before halfway through, I have students submit an in-progress report where they are telling me where they are in the process. Sometimes I have them include images of their work. Thoughts on time management is always something that we discuss. It lets them know that I am aware of how they are doing in progress. And then for the summative assessment, I actually assess the work with the student. So again, it's time consuming, but they get it. They understand why they're getting the grade that they are getting. So I will have them, I will sit down with them. We will cover each part of the rubric, and then, they will know what I was thinking. But it also gives them an opportunity to let me know, I tried this and it didn't work, so I ended up having to do that. And so it gives me more insight into their process as well. Another tried and true strategy is simply getting work out into the community. So exhibits and competitions are, I think, really important, whether it's city, state, national, or just displaying art throughout your school. It is how your program prospers. It allows students who aren't familiar with what your program offers to get some insight. And I think that, the pride that students gain in having their work displayed is immeasurable, especially with entry-level classes. I have always really enjoyed the Capitol Art Exhibit because typically we will select students at my school who are not super advanced. So because it's not a juried show and their work is guaranteed to get displayed, they think it's spectacular that, they might be a freshman or a sophomore and having their work displayed at the Capitol. And, and they get to go to a reception and it's packed and people are making a big deal out of it. And so those kind of experiences are fantastic. We aren't performers. What we do as visual artists is a really solitary activity. And so for our students, exhibits and competitions are their performances, and it's their time and opportunity to show the work that they've done and all of the time that they've put into creating something that's very personal to them. The final strategy is the importance of showing students my own skills and studio practices. I make a sample of any project that I teach, no matter how well I feel like I know the material. I feel like making a sample guides in how I teach it. Even after 15 years of teaching 3D art, I learn new things about tools and materials all of the time. And a lot of that happens when I'm making samples. This slide shows samples that I've made for just one class so far this year. Obviously, due to the current climate, I'm doing a lot of new projects. However, projects that I do every year, I make a sample along with the students, and I make one for each class. So if I have 2 ceramic classes, then I've got 2 sgraffito vases going. So, I think that I do this to model technique, to show them how I use and maintain tools, and how I maintain my workspace. I know that as artists, we sometimes feel that we don't have time to make our own work and to work on our own portfolios, and making samples is the only thing that we ever do. And I understand and respect that, but I also feel that my skills have gotten so much sharper and better through this process, and that I've become a better artist through making samples. So it is one of the things that I can't imagine not doing as a teacher. Thank you for joining me for this webinar. I hope that the information that I presented was useful, and I look forward to hearing some responses and having you share with me some of the experiences of what you are doing in your classroom. Thank you.